Have you ever looked at an ancient landmark and sensed a story beneath the surface? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the place where forgotten stones reveal their quiet mysteries. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share where in the world you're watching from. The stone that waits for sunrise. In the heart of Australia's vast red desert, far from the coastal winds and the cities that edge the continent, there rises a stone unlike any other. It stands alone on an ancient plain, immense and unsteady, as though the land itself lifted its spine toward the sky. The desert stretches outward in every direction, flat, silent, shimmering under heat that blurs the horizon. The wind moves slowly here, carrying the scent of dust and warm earth. The sky arches overhead, vast and empty, a dome of quiet light, and in the center of this emptiness rests Uluru, a monolith so old that time seems young beside it, a presence so grounded that the desert feels arranged around it, a stone that seems not merely to exist, but to wait. People call it many things: a landmark, a monument, a sacred shape, a memory of the earth before memory itself. But in the long silence before dawn, when the sky is still dark and the desert breathes cool air that lasts only a few minutes each day, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes the stone that waits for sunrise. At night, Uluru is a dark silhouette against the sky. Its massive form absorbs the moonlight, appearing heavier, denser, as though it holds the weight of ages. Stars drift above it in slow arcs. The desert floor cools, and faint breezes whisper along the spinifex grass. Small animals emerge from burrows and leave winding trails through the sand. The monolith watches this quiet life unfold, unmoving, unchanged, patient. As the first hints of dawn approach, a subtle change sweeps across the desert, a faint brightening of the horizon, a thinning of shadows, a slight warming of the air. Uluru remains dark, but its edges begin to soften. Those who have stood near it at this hour describe a peculiar sensation, as though the stone is breathing with the land. Not literally, not in movement, but in presence. The entire desert seems to hold its breath, as light gathers below the horizon, waiting for the moment the sun lifts into the sky. Uluru waits too, as it has waited every morning for thousands upon thousands of years. If you walk toward the monolith in this half-light, your footsteps make almost no sound. The sand and ancient soil absorb every movement. The stone grows larger with each step, until its bulk dominates the view. Towering above you, colored not yet red, but a deep shadowed violet. Up close, the stone is not smooth. It is ridged, torn, cracked, and rippled by erosion and time. The surface holds patterns shaped by wind, rain, and passage of seasons. Long grooves run down its sides like frozen streams. Deep caves open into darkness. The rock's texture shifts from grainy to polished, depending on where you touch it. And even though it is solid stone, it feels alive. The Anangu people, traditional custodians of this land, have stories about Uluru that long predate written history. Their stories tell of ancestors, of creation forces, of journeys written into the stone's very surface. The curves and cuts in the rock are not random. They hold meaning older than language, older than maps, older than memory carried across generations. But even without knowing those stories, anyone standing before the monolith can feel something. A sense of presence, a sense of waiting, a sense that the stone has seen more dawns than any mind can fathom. As the sun approaches the horizon, the color of the stone begins to change, slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly at first, from deep violet to muted maroon, then to a soft red that grows brighter with each passing moment. The desert behind you glows pale gold. Birdsong emerges from the cool air. Distant hills catch the light, and then the sun rises. Light strikes the stone in a sudden bloom, and Uluru ignites with color: red, orange, gold, a shifting fire that ripples across its massive face. The stone that waits for sunrise becomes a blaze of living earth. Every crack shines, every groove glows, Every shadow sharpens. Those who witness this moment often find themselves silent without planning to be. The transformation feels personal, intimate, as though the stone is waking from a long night spent in quiet meditation. For a few minutes each morning, Uluru looks impossibly bright, as though lit from within by ancient embers that come alive only when touched by the first light of day. Then the colors shift again. They soften, they deepen, they settle into the warm, rust-red tone that Uluru carries through the day. The waiting is over. The stone has greeted the sun once more. As daylight strengthens, the desert grows louder. Wind picks up, birds call, insects buzz and flicker in the warming air. The stone itself radiates heat, absorbing sunlight into its surface. Now, standing at its base, the sense of morning wonder transforms into something steadier, an awareness of the stone's permanence, its immense weight, its deep connection to the land. Walking around the monolith reveals caves shaped like yawning mouths, hollows where water once pooled, cliffs rising nearly straight upward. The ground becomes rocky and uneven, vegetation thins. Uluru's presence is not uniform. Different sides carry different moods. Some feel welcoming, some feel guarded, some feel ancient beyond comprehension. On the eastern face, long shadows stretch until late morning, giving the slopes a cool, contemplative air. On the western side, the stone grows hot early in the day, shimmering under intense sun. The northern face feels open, exposed. The southern face feels enclosed, heavy with history. Each angle presents a different version of the same massive story. The caves along the base hold patterns carved by nature and time, scalloped walls, fluted ceilings, smooth pillars left behind when softer stone eroded away. Rainfall, though rare, leaves markings that last for years. Water trails down the rock in thin rivulets, gathering into dark streaks that look like veins. Some visitors describe hearing faint echoes inside the caves, soft tones, whispers, breaths of air moving through narrow spaces. Others describe feeling watched, not by anything human or animal, but by the land itself. The desert surrounding Uluru is not empty. It holds its own quiet life. Lizards dart between rocks. Birds search for insects beneath low shrubs. Occasionally, a solitary kangaroo crosses the distance in slow, deliberate hops. But Uluru dominates all of it. Its sheer mass affects the air currents. Its shape influences how light falls. Its presence imposes stillness. Even at midday, when heat waves ripple across the land, the monolith appears solid and immovable. The sun sits directly overhead, and shadow clings tightly to the base like a dark border. The stone radiates warmth so intensely that standing close to it feels like standing beside a great oven. And yet, even then, it feels as though Uluru is waiting again. Not for sunrise this time, but for something else. Perhaps for the cooling darkness of evening, perhaps for the subtle quiet of dusk, perhaps for the next dawn, perhaps for something older, something beyond daily cycles. As the afternoon deepens, clouds occasionally drift across the sky, high white streaks that cast thin shadows on the desert floor. Light moves across Uluru in shifting patterns. The stone responds to each change differently, holding color in ways that seem almost conscious. At certain times of year, when storm clouds gather, Uluru darkens dramatically. Charcoal gray, almost purple. Lightning in the distance illuminates its edges. Thunder rolls across the desert like an ancient voice. Rain rarely falls, but when it does, the stone transforms again. Water cascades down its sides in thin, shimmering rivers. Dark streaks appear that look like tears, running down the vast face of the rock. Pools form at the base, creating reflections that last only minutes before the desert absorbs them. Those who witness Uluru in the rain say it feels like seeing the desert breathe. Evening arrives slowly. The heat fades. Shadows lengthen. The sky becomes a gradient of gold, orange, rose, and deepening blue. Uluru's color changes once more, burning bright red for a brief moment before settling into maroon, then violet, then shadow. At sunset, the stone that waits for sunrise becomes the stone that holds the day's final light. As darkness returns, the temperature drops quickly. Night animals emerge. Stars brighten across the sky. The Milky Way appears in a swath of pale light stretching over the monolith like a cosmic river. Uluru sinks back into silhouette. Quiet, steady, eternal. Waiting again. Waiting for the next morning, for the first pale glow on the horizon, for the moment the world brightens and the stone awakens. The desert rests around it. The sky drifts slowly. The land lies still, and the stone waits with the patience of ages, with the silence of the earth, holding each night like a deep breath before dawn. When visitors finally turn to leave, walking back across the desert paths toward the distant road, many look over their shoulders for one last glimpse. Uluru stands exactly as it always has, unmoved, unchanging, unending, a stone older than memory, a witness older than history, a presence carved not by hands, but by time itself. The stone that waits for sunrise waits still, and tomorrow, as every day before, it will greet the sun once more with the quiet certainty of a world that remembers far more than it reveals. The giant that drinks the sea mist, off the wild western coast of the Orkney Islands, where the North Atlantic heaves against cliffs older than memory, there rises a sandstone pillar so tall and so improbable that even the sea seems to hesitate before striking it. Waves roll in from distant storms, carrying the breath of polar winds and the long echoes of ocean miles. Sea mist drifts thick along the coast, curling around the cliff edges in cold ribbons, and in the midst of this restless border between ocean and land stands a shape that feels part natural, part legend, and entirely alive. A towering column of red sandstone, carved by time and tide into the resemblance of a thin, solitary figure, the Old Man of Hoy. To the world, he is a sea stack, but to anyone who approaches him closely, he feels like something more. He feels like the giant that drinks the sea mist. From a distance, he looks both fragile and powerful, a tall, narrow form rising almost straight out of the ocean, separated from the mainland by erosion and the endless roar of waves. He stands roughly 137 meters tall, enough to rival cliffs themselves. Thin at the waist, broad at the shoulders, he leans ever so slightly as though bracing against the wind. And yet he stands. He has stood longer than storms, longer than ships, longer than any witness alive today. To see him is to feel the impossible, a sense that this stone stack should have fallen long ago, and yet remains upright with a patience that defies the sea's relentless hunger. Salt spray clings to his surface, glazing the sandstone in fine droplets that glimmer in cold light. The mist that rises around him clings to his shape like a cloak. He drinks it in, silently, with every hour of the day. To reach him, you follow a narrow footpath along cliffs of layered stone. The grass is wind-bent, pressed low to the ground by gusts that arrive without warning. The Atlantic breathes below, a deep, rolling growl beneath the cliff edges. Gannets dive far out at sea. Fulmars glide along the wind currents. The air tastes of salt and cold water, and each step draws the old man closer, though he remains partially hidden until the final turn in the cliff path. Only when the trail curves along a jutting promontory does he reveal himself fully. A massive figure, a solitary tower, a presence carved by wind and wave. The air shifts noticeably when you first see him. The wind seems to steady. The sound of the waves deepens. The sky hangs a little heavier. There is something about the old man that changes the atmosphere simply by being there, as though all natural forces acknowledge his endurance. Up close, he becomes even stranger. His shape is unmistakably human in form, a towering silhouette with a broad upper section, a narrow waist, and legs formed by stacked columns of stone. The surface is ridged with centuries of erosion. Layers of ancient sediment lie exposed in horizontal lines that once held the memory of riverbeds and desert dunes from long before Scotland ever cooled. If you listen carefully, you may hear water moving inside small cracks of the stone, dripping down through pockets carved by storms. The sea itself sends thin sprays of dissolving mist upward, touching the stone with each crash of waves below. The giant drinks the sea mist with every tide. Legend has it that he once walked the cliffs, striding across the island before he turned to stone. Some say he challenged another giant, leaping from the land in a fit of anger, only to sink into the sea and harden where he fell. Others say he stood vigil over passing ships, pointing sailors toward safe water. A few stories say he grew from the island itself, a protector who emerged when the sea threatened to swallow the land. These are stories, yes, but the old man feels like something born from story more than geology. Even climbers, who measure him and map every crack and ledge, admit that the stone has character. They describe him as moody, sometimes cooperative, sometimes hostile. The sandstone shifts subtly with weather, holds crumble without warning. Deep, vertical fissures run down the stack like scars. During storms, the entire pillar trembles under the force of crashing waves. Yet he stands. He stood when longboats passed beneath him. He stood through centuries of storms. He stood through winters that carved cliffs into new shapes. He stood through summers that dried his surface into brittle flakes. He stood through centuries of night and uncountable dawns. The sea mist that wraps around him each morning is more than simple moisture. It feels like memory, like breath, like something the stone absorbs so it may continue standing. At sunrise, when the first light touches the cliffs, the old man remains in shadow for a few minutes longer, as though waking slowly. Then the sun reaches him, a soft glow, turning the red sandstone into shades of amber and gold. Mist rises in gentle sheets from the ocean as warmth touches the cold water, drifting upward to wrap around the stack. The giant drinks deeply then. The mist clings to his entire surface, shimmering like breath on a cold morning. The curves and ridges of the stone sharpen in the light, shadow pools in deep crevices. The base remains dark, wet, and slick. Climbers describe a strange feeling when ascending him, a sensation of being watched. Not watched with intent, but with presence, as though the stone acknowledges their efforts, as though he remembers every handhold used across decades, every rope that touched his surface, every boot that scraped against him. One climber wrote in his journal, "It feels like climbing a being, not a rock. He doesn't stop you. He doesn't help you. He simply waits." Another said she felt the stone vibrate gently beneath her palms, though there was no wind and no waves hitting the base at the time. Some claim the mist thickens more around the stack than anywhere else along the cliffs. Some say it thins near him, as though absorbed. Others say it flows upward in spirals before dissipating. No scientific measurement confirms any of these sensations, but people feel them, and that is often enough for mystery to thrive. During storms, the old man disappears entirely, swallowed by rain, fog, and waves so high they strike his lower half with thunderous force. Observers from the cliffs see nothing but movement, nothing but chaos, nothing but the breath of the sea rising in furious curtains of spray. But beneath that thick blanket of sea mist, the old man stands unaffected. He has been battered by storms since before recorded history. He has learned the rhythm of the sea better than any creature alive. When the storm clears and the mist thins, he emerges again, not changed, but renewed, as if the sea has given him something he needs to endure. Erosion shapes him, yes, but not fast enough to challenge his presence. At dusk, the giant becomes something different. The sun sets behind the cliffs, and the old man grows darker until he becomes a silhouette, a black figure carved against a sky of copper and steel. The sea mist thickens again, rising in soft veils that cling to his outer edges. With the waves quieter and the wind softer, he appears to breathe. The sea whispers below. The cliffs hold their silence, and the giant stands in stillness so complete that even time feels hesitant. At night, the old man blends into the darkness. The horizon vanishes, sky and sea merging into a single void. Only the faint glimmer of starlight along his edges reveals his shape. Sometimes, during certain phases of the moon, the mist glows faintly, wrapping the stack in shifting halos of light. Sailors of the past often told stories of seeing a glowing figure standing in the sea, a ghost of stone illuminated by moonlit fog. Some believed he was a warning. Others believed he was a guide. Still others believed he was a sentinel, watching over waters that swallowed ships without mercy. Modern visitors, even without those old beliefs, still feel a chill when viewing the giant at night. Not fear, not unease, just the quiet awareness that this shape has stood longer than generations can track. He feels like a monument to endurance, a pillar of patience, a remnant of something the sea has almost claimed. The base of the old man is constantly attacked by the ocean. The water erodes it little by little, carving caves and hollows that threaten the stack's stability. Scientists predict that one day the base will narrow too far, and the entire pillar will collapse into the sea as others before it have done. But for now, he stands. He holds the sea mist. He drinks the breath of the ocean. He waits for each new tide with the same quiet certainty. If you sit on the cliffs for long enough, watching the waves rise and fall around him, you may begin to feel his rhythm. The waves crash, the mist rises, the stone absorbs it, and the cycle repeats. Some travelers describe this rhythm as calming. Others describe it as ancient. A few describe it as a heartbeat hidden in stone. The giant that drinks the sea mist is not a simple formation. He is a witness, a keeper of memory, a survivor of erosion, storm, and time. And though he will fall someday, as all stone eventually does, his presence remains immutable for now. A figure standing between sea and sky, drinking the mist that drifts endlessly from the waves. When you finally walk away from the cliffs, the wind at your back and the path winding toward the mainland, you may feel compelled to look back one last time. The old man stands exactly where you left him, unmoving, unyielding, almost human in silhouette. He does not wave. He does not shift. He simply watches. And as the sea mist curls again around his weathered shape, rising in slow spirals toward the cold northern air, it feels as though he draws in a deep breath from the ocean below, drinking the mist, drinking the memory, drinking the world that shaped him. The giant that drinks the sea mist endures. The pillar that refused to fall. In the wide, open plains of northeastern Wyoming, where grasslands roll in soft green waves and distant hills curve gently beneath enormous skies, there rises a shape that seems far too strange, far too sheer, and far too deliberate to belong to the ordinary world. It stands alone, a tower of vertical stone columns rising abruptly from the earth, as though lifted from below by forces that have long since fallen silent. The land around it stretches outward in every direction, quiet and humble, as though making space for something older, something monumental, something enduring. Devil's Tower, they call it today, though long before that name ever wrapped itself around the stone, it had other names, sacred names, names whispered by tribes who walked these plains before history began taking notes, names that described not fear, but reverence, a presence, a pillar that belonged not just to the land, but to something larger. Standing before it, it feels less like a formation and more like a memory carved into the earth. The pillar that refused to fall. It rises nearly 900 feet above the valley floor, its sides impossibly vertical, its summit a flat crown that catches the first and last light of each day. Columns of hexagonal basalt stand like frozen organ pipes, fused together into a single massive tower. From afar, the formation looks almost like a tree stump left behind by some colossal ancient forest, a trunk too vast to ever burn, too stubborn to decay. The closer you walk toward it, the more overwhelming its scale becomes. What seemed tall becomes towering. What seemed smooth becomes ridged. What seemed silent begins to speak in long, low echoes of wind moving across stone. To approach Devil's Tower is to feel yourself shrinking, not in fear, but in perspective. The land around it feels younger by comparison. The hills seem like ripples left behind when the tower rose. The trees appear like small attendants standing reverently at its base. Even the sky seems to widen, as if making room for the presence of something that has stood against centuries of storms without ever bending. The air changes as you near it. It grows still, heavier, quieter, as though the formation absorbs sound. Long before geologists studied it, long before climbers scaled its columns, long before maps marked its outline, people told stories of how the tower came to be. Some speak of a giant bear clawing at the stone, its scratches becoming the vertical ridges. Others speak of children lifted onto the pillar to escape danger. Others say the tower grew from the heartbeat of the earth, pushed upward by forces that shaped mountains, rivers, and plains. All the stories agree on one thing. The tower rose for a reason, and when you stand at its base, even without knowing any of those tales, you feel the truth in that unity. Devil's Tower does not look accidental. It looks chosen. Winds coming across the plains often strike the tower and split around it, creating swirling currents. You can feel these currents brushing your skin as you walk around the base trail. Cool gusts on a warm afternoon, warm gusts on a cool morning. Birds ride the air currents along the cliff face, circling the tower in patterns that resemble ritual paths. Climbers, those who have touched the stone with hands and feet, describe a strange vibration in the columns. Not a tremor, not movement, something subtler, a hum of existence, as though the stone carries the memory of the earth's deep heat that formed it millions of years ago. When rain falls on the tower, thin ribbons of water stream down between the columns, creating hundreds of small waterfalls that shimmer briefly before disappearing into the soil. During thunderstorms, lightning has struck the summit so often that the ground up top is cracked in places, scorched in others. The sound of thunder bouncing off the tower echoes across the valley like the roar of something waking. At dawn, Devil's Tower emerges slowly from night. Its shadow lies long across the plains, stretching like a dark road pointing toward the sunrise. As the light touches the vertical columns, they shift through colors: deep purple, soft gray, warm gold, then bright tan. The stone seems to inhale the light, brightening with an intensity that feels alive. If you stand very still, you can hear small stones cracking, warming in the sun. The tower expands and contracts with temperature, though it never loosens its grip on the earth. There is a persistence in the formation, a refusal to yield, even in the subtle daily motions of stone under heat. During midday, the tower blends almost seamlessly with the sky, its tan walls glowing under the sun. Shadows fall sharply between the columns, creating long dark blades running down the stone. Birds of prey circle near the summit, occasionally landing on narrow ledges invisible from the ground. From certain angles, especially in the heat haze of summer, the tower looks as though it floats slightly above the plains, a mirage of solidity suspended in shimmering light. Visitors often stop mid-trail just to stare, uncertain if what they see is real or an illusion crafted by heat and distance. In winter, when snow collects in the crevices between the columns, Devil's Tower becomes a different kind of monument, silent, white-rimmed, almost gentle. Snow softens the sharp lines of the rock, filling cracks and ridges with pale shadows. The tower glows faintly in low winter sunlight, its presence less imposing but no less commanding. The valley around it becomes quiet, muffled by snow, and the tower stands like a sentinel watching over a sleeping land. At night, when the moon rises, Devil's Tower transforms yet again. Moonlight gathers along the vertical columns, turning them into silver blades. The summit glows faintly. Shadows stretch upward rather than downward. Stars drift across the sky above the crown, tracing arcs that seem to begin and end at the tower's edges. Sometimes visitors camping nearby describe hearing faint sounds echoing off the stone. Not voices, not whispers, just the soft resonance of wind moving through a forest of stone pillars. Some say the tower looms larger at night, almost impossibly large, as though the darkness removes the limitations of distance and grants the formation its true size. Others say it feels closer, as if the land itself contracts around it in the dark. Climbing the tower is a ritual for those who seek it. The vertical cracks form natural pathways upward, but each route requires strength, patience, and trust. Climbers often speak of the stone's texture: warm in summer, cold in fall, gritty under the fingers, steady under the palms. Some describe feeling as though the tower's columns lean inward, subtly shifting their weight to support those who climb. Others say the opposite, that the columns seem to pull away slightly, testing their resolve. These sensations defy measurement, but not experience. The summit of Devil's Tower is surprisingly flat, a high meadow of stone, windswept and quiet. Standing there, One sees the entire plain spread out in every direction. Distant hills, forests, rivers, ranch lands, horizons that seem impossibly far. It feels like standing on the world's pulse, like standing where the land breathes. On the summit, climbers have found traces of ancient fires, stones arranged in patterns, markings left by those who ascended long before ropes, chalk, and harnesses existed. These remnants hint at rituals performed under starlight, at ceremonies carried out in deep reverence. Whatever those rituals were, they are lost now, but their echo remains. Devil's Tower holds stories without speaking them. It holds memory without revealing it. It holds shape without changing. And beneath all that endurance lies something else, a refusal. Stone should fall. Stone should crumble. Stone should bow to weather, wind, and time. But this pillar does not. It has not. It will not. Not yet. Researchers have measured the erosion rates. They have calculated how long the tower might stand. They have projected timelines of collapse. But the tower does not listen. It does not lean. It does not fracture beyond surface weathering. The pillar that refused to fall endures with a quiet strength, a kind of defiance, a patience carved not by resistance, but by acceptance of its place in the world. Wind comes and goes. Storms strike and fade. The seasons revolve endlessly. The tower watches it all with unbroken stillness. When you walk away from Devil's Tower, back down the trail, across the grassland, toward the distant parking lot or campsite, you may feel compelled to turn around one more time. And when you do, the tower stands exactly as it did when you first arrived, unchanged, unafraid, unmoved, its vertical lines carved not just into rock, but into memory, its silhouette rising against the vast Wyoming sky like an ode to permanence, its presence refusing to disappear, even as the sun sinks behind it, even as shadows stretch long across the plains. The tower holds its shape with quiet certainty. It stands because it stands. It endures because it endures. It refuses to fall because falling has never been part of its story. The pillar that refused to fall remains, a monument to time, to endurance, to the silent history of stone, and to the unyielding patience of the earth. The lone sentinel of the Sahara. In the heart of the Sahara, far from caravan routes and far-flung nomad trails, where sand stretches in pale gold arcs beneath a dome of endless heat, lies a vast geological mystery whose curves are so immense they cannot be fully understood from the ground. To the satellites above, it appears as a colossal eye staring upward from the desert floor, concentric rings etched into the earth like ripples frozen in time. But to those who walk the sand surrounding it, the Rishat structure feels less like an eye and more like a memory too large to hold. Along its outer rim, where ancient ridges rise in low, worn arcs, there stands a formation not often noticed on maps or photographs. A cluster of weathered stone outcrops, isolated and silent, emerging from the desert like watchtowers guarding the edge of something too old to explain. They call it the lone sentinel of the Sahara. To reach the rim outcrops, you cross leagues of open desert, not dunes, but vast plains of sand mixed with gravel, broken only by low ridges that shift the horizon's shape. The land here is quiet in a way few places are. No trees, no birdsong, no streams or running water, only wind moving across the sand in long sighs that rise and fall like the breath of an invisible giant. Even the sun feels different in this place, sharper, older, as though the sky remembers a time before the desert dried. The Rishat structure spans nearly 50 kilometers in diameter, yet, standing within it, scale becomes difficult to grasp. The rings curve around you in arcs so gentle, they feel like the edges of an ancient amphitheater. The desert at your feet is rough with scattered stones, quartz fragments, flint, and bits of ancient sediment that once formed seabeds millions of years before humans ever crossed these sands. And rising from this weathered plain, far from the nearest shade, stands a solitary outcrop, a jagged tower of stone that looks as though it was left behind by an ancient hand, the lone sentinel. Its shape is not symmetrical, nor graceful, nor carved by any human, but there is intent in its stance, a verticality born of endurance, layers of rock tilting upward, fractured by time, fused by heat, sculpted by the desert's relentless patience. It stands alone. It stands silent. It stands as though keeping watch over something buried beneath the rings of the Risha. Approaching it, you feel the temperature rise slightly, not because the stone is warm, though it is, but because the air changes. Desert heat gathers near the rock, swirling in subtle patterns. Dust lifts lightly from the ground. The wind seems to curve around the formation the way water curves around a boulder in a stream. When you place your hand on its surface, the stone feels unexpectedly smooth. Windblown sand has polished certain faces of it into a soft sheen. Other sides remain rough, bearing the scars of erosion, cracks, flakes, and deep grooves carved across its surface like ancient writing. Some travelers say the stone hums faintly, not a sound, but a sensation, a vibration running through the rock, as though the desert itself still breathes beneath its skin. Standing at the base of the Sentinel, you begin to understand why nomads speak of it quietly. The formation is not tall compared to mountains, not imposing compared to cliffs, but in the middle of an endless plateau. Its height feels significant. It stands as the only upright shape for kilometers, a lone figure rising from a world of horizontal lines. From a distance, it appears like a person standing in contemplation. From up close, it appears like the memory of a mountain that once existed. From beneath it, looking upward, it appears like a monument to endurance. The rock layers reveal histories too vast for human timescales. Layers formed in ancient oceans, layers pressed together during tectonic upheaval, layers baked under long-vanished volcanic heat. Geologists describe the rim outcrops as remnants of uplifted, eroded domes, but even they admit the structure defies simple explanation. Why is it circular? Why does the Sentinel stand where it does? Why does the desert feel different around it? Questions rise in the heat, linger in the air, and drift away with the wind. The Sentinel casts a long shadow during sunrise. The arc of that shadow stretches along the desert floor, tracing a line of cool darkness against the warming sands. As the sun climbs, the shadow shrinks slowly, then curls beneath the rock until it disappears entirely in the midday glare. At noon, the stone glows a pale gold, the heat so intense it blurs the edges of the horizon. Mirage lines ripple outward, turning the world into waves of shimmering light. Even in this harsh illumination, the lone sentinel maintains its outline, sharp, vertical, unwavering. Travelers who stand near it during this hour describe hearing faint clicks within the rock, the result of heat expanding long-cooled stone. The clicks echo softly across the desert, like the ticking of a massive clock counting down an age no human can comprehend. The sentinel's base is encircled by scattered stones, fragments broken off by centuries of erosion. These fragments form a natural ring, a boundary subtly marking the space where the lone sentinel stands. Within that circle, the sand is finer, softer, almost untouched. Outside the circle, the desert feels ordinary. Inside, it feels ancient. Wind gathers within the boundary differently. Shadows fall deeper. Silence grows thicker. Some nomads claim that standing within the sentinel's ring allows one to hear the desert speak, a whisper carried from dune to dune, ridge to ridge, across distances too vast for the human mind to map. Whether or not the desert has a voice, the sentinel certainly has presence. As the day progresses, the formation becomes a sundial. The angle of its shadow reveals the hour. The warmth of its stone reveals the season. The direction of the wind patterns around it reveals the approaching weather. For those who live by the desert's rules, the sentinel is a guide, not because it tells time, but because it remembers it. Afternoon brings a shift in color. The pale gold of midday deepens into rose. The stone blushes with the soft red light of late sun. Shadows lengthen once more. Heat fades from the air. If you climb a nearby rise and watch the sentinel from a distance, you see it framed against the sweeping rings of the Risha structure. A lone vertical line amid an enormous circle. a sentinel guarding an ancient eye. At sunset, something extraordinary happens. The stone ignites with color, not flame, but reflected fire, burning orange, deep copper, darkening crimson, then purple, as the last trace of sun slips below the horizon. The sentinel absorbs each hue as though it has done so for eons. And when darkness finally falls, the stone cools rapidly. The heat escapes in invisible waves that shimmer the air for a few lingering seconds. Night claims the desert with surprising swiftness, and the stars appear one by one, filling the sky with cold brilliance. Under starlight, the lone sentinel becomes a silhouette against the sand, a black shape, a thin outline of stone holding the same posture it has held for countless ages. Some who camp nearby report seeing the stone faintly glimmer at night, not from any true luminescence, but from reflected starlight catching the polished sides. It appears almost like a lighthouse in reverse, not shining out but reflecting the distant constellations inward. Others say that the stone looks taller in the darkness, that the absence of light removes the sense of scale, allowing the formation to stretch upward in the mind's eye. Some swear they have seen it lean slightly, as though adjusting its stance, but in the morning, it always remains exactly where it stood the day before. Night winds in the Sahara carry sand grains that whisper across the desert floor. These grains strike the sentinel with soft taps, tiny, persistent impacts that have shaped its form grain by grain. If you sit close to the stone, you may hear these taps like distant rain, a faint percussive rhythm marking the slow work of time. And in that quiet rhythm lies the sentinel's endurance. It stands not because it resists erosion, but because it accepts it. Stone endures by understanding time differently than humans do. The sentinel does not fear its own dissolution. It does not cling to its shape. It simply stands until it cannot. And so far, it continues to stand. As dawn approaches again, the temperature drops to its coldest point just before sunrise. The desert breathes out the last of the night's coolness, and the sentinel emerges from the darkness as a pale ghost of stone. The cycle begins anew. Light touches one edge. The stone brightens. The shadow stretches. The day awakens. Travelers who have visited the Rishat structure often describe an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, a feeling that they have stood there before, even if they know they have not. The circular shape of the landscape, the placement of the sentinel, the symmetry of repeated curves, all create a sensation of recognition, as though the earth has patterned itself like memory. The lone sentinel feels like the exclamation mark at the edge of that memory, a boundary stone, a marker of an ancient event long lost to erosion, a witness that does not speak but remains. Some say the Rishat structure was once an impact crater. Others argue it was a volcanic dome. Still others see the rings as remnants of long-vanished rivers, and a few whisper theories too strange to repeat, of lost civilizations and forgotten catastrophes. But the sentinel does not offer explanations. It offers presence. When you stand beside it, you sense deep time, not in years, but in eras, long before dunes, long before humans, long before the Sahara was sand. There is something grounding about that timelessness, something steady, something oddly comforting, because the lone sentinel is not defying time, it is embodying it. And when you finally walk away, leaving it behind as the desert claims its silence once more, you may look back and find the stone watching the horizon exactly as it has watched it for millennia, unmoved, unburdened, unending, at least for now. The lone sentinel of the Sahara stands at the edge of the world's forgotten eye, holding the shape of endurance, holding the breath of the desert, holding mysteries too vast for words. The House of the Whispering Faces, south of the Caspian Sea, where wind moves across stone and as patiently as the passing of centuries, lies a landscape carved by time, shaped by ancient fires, and marked by the hands of people whose names have long dissolved into dust. The hills here rise in gentle curves, their surfaces split by old fault lines and scattered with massive boulders left behind after the earth cracked and lifted in prehistoric upheavals. The air tastes faintly of salt from the distant sea, and the ground underfoot feels dry and brittle, etched with the pathways of small animals and the ghosts of forgotten footsteps. This place is called Gobustan, a cradle of rock and silence, where thousands of petroglyphs are spread across the slopes and stones like pages in a book whose meaning is felt, not read. Shape after shape, etched by stone on stone, waits beneath the open sky. Animals, hunters, boats, ritual figures with arms raised toward the sun, and faces, countless faces, staring outward from the past with expressions that seem almost alive. Among the many formations in this ancient reserve, there is one cluster of stones that seems to gather the past more tightly than all the rest. A group of boulders arranged not by human hands, but by the slow tilt of the earth, forming a kind of sheltered chamber. Wind flows through cracks and passageways between them. Light enters in narrow blades. Shadows stretch across the smooth floors as the sun passes overhead, and covering nearly every surface are carvings of faces. Long, thin, deep, shallow, abstract, detailed, worn, and fresh-looking despite their age. People call this place the House of the Whispering Faces. From afar, it looks like a natural shelter, a cluster of leaning stones, a shallow overhang, a long split boulder lying diagonally like a fallen lintel. But as you approach, the sense of intention grows. The stones seem positioned to frame each other. Openings resemble doorways. Larger slabs form what could be a central room. Curved walls catch the wind and amplify it, and the carvings, etched into every reachable surface, create the feeling of being watched from every direction, not with menace, not with judgment, but with recognition. It is as though the faces carved into the stone know you are there, know that you, too, are looking across time and wondering what remains of those who carved them. When you step inside the house, the light dims, the stone walls curve inward, the air cools slightly, holding a faint smell of dust and earth. The ground becomes smoother, polished by countless feet, human, animal, or wind-driven grains of sand. A breeze slips through a crack in the upper rock, whispering softly as it passes. It is that whisper that gave the chamber its name. Standing inside, your ears fill with a soft hiss, the sound of ancient winds navigating narrow stone spaces. The sound is constant, rising and falling but never fully stopping. Some say it resembles voices, not words, but breaths, not speech, but presence. A chorus of air that feels layered, textured, as if thousands of years of wind have learned to speak in tones too subtle for language. But the true presence of the house lies in the faces. They are everywhere, carved into walls, boulders, ceilings, and flat surfaces. Some are simple circles with 2 dots for eyes. Some are elongated heads with sharp noses and deep eye hollows. Some resemble masks. Others look like spirits. Some are so worn they seem to fade in and out of visibility as the light shifts. The faces vary in size. Some no larger than a hand, others the height of a child, and a few nearly life-sized. The arrangement of the faces is not random. They cluster together. They form lines. They spiral outward. They appear beside symbols, animals, boats, and dancers. One long horizontal stone contains a row of faces spanning nearly 2 meters, each different, each carved with a unique expression. Researchers have debated whether these represent individuals, deities, ancestors, or ritual participants. No theory fully satisfies the mystery, because when you stand in front of them, something else becomes clear. The faces feel alive, not because of their design, but because of the space they inhabit. Wind and light bring them movement. When clouds drift across the sun, shadows slide along the carvings, shifting their expressions. When the breeze blows through cracks in the stone, dust dances across the faces, giving the illusion of blinking eyes. When the sun sets, the chamber darkens slowly, and the faces seem to withdraw into the rock. Yet when dawn arrives, new light catches different carvings, awakening the chamber in a fresh sequence. The House of the Whispering Faces holds time gently, releasing it in fragments, The first travelers who stumbled upon the chamber described feeling watched, not with fear, but with the sensation of stepping into someone else's memory. One explorer wrote in his journal that he could sense the presence of a gathering, long dispersed, as if the stone chamber had once been filled with voices, movement, and ritual. He noted that the faces felt like witnesses rather than portraits. Witnesses to what? He could not say. Some archaeologists believe the site served as a communal gathering place. Others think it was a ceremonial chamber. Still others suggest a teaching area where knowledge was shared through carvings and stories. A few consider it a kind of open-air shrine. But the faces themselves offer no explanations. They look outward, not inward. They look at you, not at each other. They observe the present, not the past. The wind inside the chamber shifts direction throughout the day. In the morning, it enters from the eastern cracks. At midday, it circulates gently through the top opening. In the evening, it enters from the west, carrying the last warmth of sunlight. Some researchers have suggested that the builders chose this formation or recognized its natural acoustics because the wind would animate the carvings. When the breeze strikes certain openings, the chamber produces soft tones, almost melodic, echoing faintly against bare stone. Visitors standing in the chamber during a strong gust often report hearing these tones, a mixture of low hums and higher whispers, like breath passing over the mouth of an ancient flute. The sound does not frighten. It resonates. It feels like an artifact older than the carvings themselves, older than the stone, older than the memory of the land. Outside the chamber, the terrain rises in rocky terraces. Larger petroglyphs cover the exposed boulders, images of ibex, bulls, wild horses, and long, slender boats that seem out of place so far inland. The sea once reached this region thousands of years ago, and the people who carved these animals also carved ships that may have sailed along ancient shorelines. From those outer stones, the House of the Whispering Faces appears half hidden, its entrance narrow and easily overlooked. Windblown sand gathers at its threshold. Small shrubs grow in shadows at the base of the rocks. The walls blend with the surrounding cliffs. Only when you step within do you see how many carvings lie on the inner surfaces. The chamber feels larger on the inside than it appears from outside. Not physically, but emotionally, as though the number of faces creates a sense of space beyond the stone. Some faces sit low on the walls, as though intended for children to touch. Others sit high, accessible only to tall individuals, or to those who climb the rock. Many faces cluster around natural depressions, bowl-shaped carvings whose purpose remains unknown. Perhaps they held water. Perhaps they held offerings. Perhaps they held pigment for painting. Perhaps they held nothing but shadow. When rain falls, rare in this arid region, water drips into some of the carved bowls. It collects for only a short time before evaporating. But while it lasts, reflections shimmer across the chamber walls. The faces appear to ripple, their outlines trembling in the shifting light. Some seem to stretch, others seem to disappear. It is easy to understand why ancient peoples might have found meaning in such behavior. Rock and water, light and shadow, wind and echo. These were their tools for understanding a world both vast and intimate. Inside the chamber, the temperature is cooler. The shade protects the stone from direct sun. Birds occasionally perch at the entry, but rarely enter. Even insects seem hesitant to cross the threshold. The silence here is not total. Wind and distant sounds of the plateau always drift through, but it is controlled, shaped by the stone as though the house itself regulates the sound it allows. If you sit quietly, the whispering begins to feel rhythmic, almost patterned. A shift in the breeze, a sigh through the cracks, a faint rustle of grains of sand. Some visitors compare it to distant chanting. Others hear nothing unusual, but those who feel attuned to the space describe the sound as layered, like voices overlapping, not as speech, but as a wave. The faces reinforce this illusion. Some carvings stare directly outward, others gaze upward. A few tilt slightly as though listening. One has ears carved prominently. Another has a wide mouth that seems open in perpetual murmur. Together, they form a chorus of silent expressions, caught in mid-thought for thousands of years. The ground in the house feels smoother than the outer rocks, polished perhaps by human movement long ago. Many scholars believe that people gathered here for rituals or storytelling. The curvature of the walls suggests a natural amphitheater. The acoustics enhance sound, and the faces, observing, witnessing, form a circle of onlookers that transcends time. At night, the chamber changes. The temperature drops sharply. The moonlight enters through the top opening in thin, pale beams. The faces retreat into darkness, appearing only when the angle of moonlight strikes them directly. In that moment, a single carved face might glow, while all others remain invisible. Then the moon shifts slightly, and another face emerges. Then another, and another. Visitors who have camped nearby describe this effect as mesmerizing, like watching a slow procession of ancient observers waking one by one under the moon's gaze. Outside the chamber, the sky becomes enormous at night. Stars fill the blackness with white fire. The Caspian breeze moves softly across the plateau. The silhouettes of distant boulders stand like sleeping animals, and the house of the whispering faces remains dark, a hollow memory carved into living stone. Dawn reveals the carvings again. Soft morning light enters at an angle, illuminating only the eastern side of the chamber. The faces on that side glow faintly, their lines sharp and newly visible. Others remain shadowed until the sun climbs higher. By midday, the entire chamber is bright. The sun reaches the highest cracks. The wind blows steadily. The whispering grows stronger. The stone walls feel warm to the touch. Dust motes drift lazily in the air. The carved faces appear more expressive. The deep eye hollows cast sharper shadows. The noses protrude more clearly, and the mouths seem to shift with each change in light. For a moment, one might imagine that these ancient people carved the chamber not merely to preserve images, but to create a living space where light would animate the past. Every visit becomes a new reading. Every shift in wind adds a new voice. Every hour changes the expressions. Gobustan is full of petroglyphs, thousands upon thousands. But the House of the Whispering Faces remains unique, not because its carvings are the most detailed, though some are, not because its chamber is the largest, though it is spacious, not because it is the oldest, though many carvings date back tens of thousands of years. It is unique because it feels inhabited, not by spirits, not by superstition, but by memory itself, memory that lingers in stone, memory that continues to watch, memory that continues to breathe with the wind. When you finally walk away from the chamber, stepping back into the bright open plateau, the air feels different, emptier somehow. The silence feels less structured. The wind feels less directed. The sky feels wider. You walk across stone slabs weathered into strange shapes. You pass other carvings, hunters, dancers, animals. You see the distant shimmer of the sea. You feel the dry breath of the land against your skin, but you may find yourself turning back, compelled by a sense of unfinished conversation. And when you do, the House of the Whispering Faces stands quietly, the same as it has for millennia, the same as it will for millennia more, a chamber of wind, stone, and memory. The faces remain. The whispering continues. The past endures in lines cut into rock. A house not built by humans, yet shaped by their hands. A place where time gathers in silence. A place where the ancient world still listens. The House of the Whispering Faces remains, patient, present, and quietly alive beneath the open sky of Gobustan. The column the Vikings feared. On the northern shore of Iceland's Vatnsnes Peninsula, where cold winds sweep across black sand and the North Atlantic surges in slow, heavy breaths, there rises a column of stone that does not look entirely natural. It stands alone in shallow water, dark as volcanic glass, shaped not by deliberate carving, but by the relentless work of waves, frost, and time. From a distance, its outline resembles a creature drinking from the sea, a shape with legs, a back, and a neck lowered toward the water, a creature made not of flesh, but of basalt, not of breath, but of frozen fire. Vitserkur, a sea stack that seems more alive than inert. To the Vikings who sailed along these coasts more than 1,000 years ago, The structure was more than a landmark. It was a warning rising from the sea, a thing that looked back at them, a dark column the waves could not topple, a shape they feared, or at least respected enough to speak of in hushed, cautionary tones. The column the Vikings feared. Standing before it today, the sense of unease still lingers, subtle yet unmistakable. The sea stack rises 15 meters above the waterline, its base carved into arches through which waves flow in quiet rhythm. Seabirds perch along its upper ledges. Moss and salt cling to its sides like old, half-forgotten paint. The stone feels rugged, ancient, and strangely animate, as though the volcanic forces that once birthed Iceland had left behind a sentinel to watch the coast. The air around Hvítserkur carries the smell of cold ocean, wet sand, and distant snowfields. Wind skims across the shoreline, lifting fine grains that scrape softly against boots and rock. The tide moves in slow pulses, each wave stretching long fingers of water toward the land before withdrawing with a sigh. If you approach the sea stack at low tide, the ground becomes firm beneath your feet. Dark sand gives way to patches of exposed stone. Pools of seawater reflect passing clouds. The closer you walk, the more Hvítserkur grows. At first, a distant silhouette, then a looming presence shaped by centuries of storms. From the right angle, it looks like a massive beast drinking from the sea. From another, it resembles a twisted column rising from chaos. From yet another, it appears almost like an ancient shrine carved by forgotten hands. Legends thrive in these variations. Some Vikings believed Hvítserkur was once a troll, caught by sunlight as he tried to destroy a nearby monastery. The first rays of dawn turned him to stone before he could escape the coast, leaving him frozen in eternal thirst, his mouth near the water, his legs trapped mid-stride. Other stories claim he was a giant watching the sea for enemies, refusing to fall even after death. And still others insist that deep within the stone lies the remnants of a creature older than trolls, older than Iceland itself, a being half born from fire, half carved by the cold. These stories are old, but the stone that inspired them is older still. Walking beneath Hvítserkur's arches, you feel the sea's presence intimately. Water rushes through the openings in slow, deliberate waves, like breath moving through the lungs of the coast. The sound echoes inside the hollow spaces, a low, continuous hum that blends with the wind into something that resembles the murmur of a voice too deep to understand. The columns that form the stack's legs are not smooth. They are jagged, fractured, carved by the ocean into countless small planes that catch the light differently. Some edges are sharp, others are rounded. In certain places, the basalt shows hexagonal patterns, natural crystal formations left behind when molten lava cooled too quickly under exposure to air or water. Touching the stone at low tide, you feel a cold that does not feel like ordinary cold. It is deeper, older, more mineral than temperature. The stone does not hold warmth even briefly. It draws heat out of the skin, steady and unyielding. Climbers who have touched it in winter describe it as a cold that remembers. Above, seabirds wheel and cry, their calls echoing against the stone. Fulmars glide along wind currents that wrap around the stack's upper reaches. Gulls perch on narrow ledges. Occasionally, a raven lands on the highest point, a stark black silhouette against gray clouds. Local people say ravens favor places where the old world is still awake. Hvítserkur certainly feels awake. In certain lights, shadows create the illusion of eyes within the rock. Deep hollows fill with darkness, giving the impression of a gaze fixed on the horizon. At dawn, when sunlight first cracks open the sky, the stone glows faintly golden. Mist rises from the sea and gathers around the arches, swirling like steam from an ancient forge. The stack becomes a black shape framed by light, a monument caught between night and day. The Vikings respected the sunrise here. They believed creatures of the night froze when touched by the first light, and as Hvítserkur absorbed the dawn, looming like a petrified beast, their fear made sense. Even now, the effect is startling. The stone seems to brighten from within. Its edges sharpen. Its arches appear taller. Its silhouette stretches long across the beach. The air still carries a chill, but the light gives the sea stack a presence that feels even more alive. At high tide, the sea rises around its base, swallowing the sand entirely. Waves crash directly against the stone, spraying white foam into the air. The arches become tunnels filled with roiling water. The stack seems to stand ankle-deep in the ocean, bracing itself with steady legs while the sea hurls itself against it. The force of the waves is tremendous, enough to topple weaker formations. But Hvitserkur remains. It withstands. It endures. It refuses to fall. From a boat offshore, the perspective changes dramatically. The sea stack looks larger, heavier, more ancient. The arches form dark mouths swallowing the waves. The upper body appears crouched, as though hunched in concentration or anger. Spires of stone protrude along its back like broken teeth. Seen from the water, you understand why the Vikings respected it. It is not beautiful in the usual sense. It is not symmetrical. It is not gentle. It is severe, raw, elemental. It looks like the boundary between land and sea made solid. The place where Iceland chose to reveal its violent geological birth in a single frozen gesture. Sailors centuries ago often altered their course when passing near Hvitserkur. Some refused to sail close at all. Others touched their weapons for protection. A few made offerings. A coin tossed into the sea, a piece of bread, a whispered prayer. They feared the stone because they understood the sea, and anything that rose from it in this shape might not be entirely of this world. At low tide, when the water recedes again, smaller creatures emerge along the base. Barnacles clinging to the rock, crabs moving sideways across tidal pools, seaweed swaying gently in shallow water. These small signs of life give the impression that Hvitserkur is not alone, that a community exists around it, drawn to its shelter, its cracks, its shadows, and yet the stone itself feels solitary. A sentry that stands watch but never speaks, a creature that breathes only in stone, a column that defies both time and tide. When storms descend on Iceland, which they do with fierce regularity, Hvitserkur becomes something else entirely. Waves rise high, smashing into the arches with thunderous force. Wind howls past the stone, rattling its edges and sending plumes of sea spray upward. Rain strikes from every direction. Lightning flashes across the sky, illuminating the sea stack in stark white bursts. In those moments, the column looks alive. Its silhouette twists in the chaos. Its arches glow with lightning. Its upper body appears as the outline of a creature raising its head to howl. No wonder the Vikings spoke of it as something to avoid. After storms, the air carries a sharp, metallic scent. Seaweed gathers along the shoreline in tangled piles. Broken shells litter the sand. The sea retreats slowly, easing its grip on the coast, and Hvitserkur stands in the aftermath, wet and gleaming, as though untouched. Its endurance seems impossible, yet it remains. At evening, when the sun drops behind the hills, and the sky becomes a tapestry of gold, violet, and deep blue, the sea stack's colors soften. The rock turns purple, then black, blending into the shoreline's long shadow. Birds return to roost, the waves quiet, the world grows still. Night transforms the sea stack again. Under the stars, Hvitserkur becomes a dark silhouette against the reflective sheen of moonlit water. The arches vanish in the darkness, leaving only the outline of a creature-like form. From a distance, the stone looks as though it has begun to move. Not actually, but perceptually. The mind fills the silence with imagined motions, subtle shifts, slow breaths. The Vikings believed that stone creatures could move at night, frozen only by the dawn. That legend echoes naturally when you see Hvitserkur under moonlight. Silence deepens around the formation. The waves whisper instead of crash. The wind lowers its voice. The stars drift above the stone like scattered embers. In this darkness, the sea stack feels ancient in a way that daylight softens. Not merely old, primordial. Born before human presence touched Iceland's coasts. A fragment of the Earth's early imagination. As dawn approaches again, hours later, after the tide cycles have shifted and the night cold has settled, the sea stack begins to re-emerge. Its silhouette brightens slightly. Mist gathers along the shoreline. Birds call softly from the nearby cliffs. The ocean breathes deeper. preparing for sunrise. And then the first light breaks. A thin, pale strip at the horizon, a gradual glow spreading upward, a faint illumination touching the upper edges of Vitzerkur before reaching the sea. The stone brightens slowly, edges sharpen, shapes emerge, contours become visible, the creature-like silhouette returns, the arches reappear. The dark stone glows faintly with reflected dawn. Vitzerkur drinks the light the way it drinks the mist, absorbing, holding, enduring. The column the Vikings feared stands exactly where it always has, unbroken, unmoving, unchanged except for details carved by the sea, one grain of sand at a time. When you finally walk away, leaving footprints on the dark sand, listening to the sound of waves receding behind you, you feel the presence of the sea stack even after it drops out of sight. Its memory follows you. Its silhouette lingers in the mind's eye. Its voice, carried by waves and wind, remains faint but persistent, a lonely column in the North Atlantic, a sentinel carved by volcanic fire, sculpted by water, polished by wind, a shape feared by Vikings and respected by all who see it. Vitzerkur endures, and the sea continues its endless conversation with the stone. The column the Vikings feared stands alone, a dark memory rising from cold water, a creature of stone, a guardian of the Icelandic coast, silent, present, and patient beneath the shifting sky. Thank you for wandering with us through these ancient stones and the quiet mysteries they guard. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Until our next unearthed secret, may the forgotten places rest gently in your dreams.